Here is the ultimate guide on how to get PS1 games to run on the AYN Thor. And here's my dog. Hello. Welcome back. So today we're going to be looking at getting Duckstation up and running. So I've got myself a game. I've got Crash Bandicoot 1. So I've got it in a zip file, but if we open up the zip file, you can see that I've got two files. I've got a bin or a binary file, this is the game's data, and a Q file. So this is based off a CD dump. So this is how classic PS1 games were ripped from CD. So in this video, I'm also going to show you how to convert these files. So rather than have two files, you have one, and it will also save you a lot of space, especially if you have multiple games. So first, we're just going to extract this for now. So we'll press our three buttons, extract. I'm just going to extract it to the downloads folder for now. So there we are, I've got my original zip folder and my bin and Q files. So we're going to leave them there for now, and we're going to go to Obtainium and we're going to get a couple of apps. If you've not already got Obtainium and the RJNY pack, please be sure to see this video where I covered that setup. The emulator we're going to want to use is Duckstation. Now you can use RetroArch, you can use one of the RetroArch cores, but I like using Duckstation because we have a little bit more control over the graphics. So we're going to give that a second to download. We're going to install that. And then we're also, whilst we're here, if we scroll down to our utilities, we're going to want to download this. This is CHDroid by Otavio97. It's a great little app that will convert our games from an ISO or a bin.q file to a CHD file, which will run as perfect, but at a fraction of the space, and also it'll give you a single file, which is much easier to manage. So we'll install that as well. So once both of those are installed, we're going to swipe up. We'll just drag them to our home screen just for easy access. So we'll get both of those. So now before we dive in, we're also going to need our PS1 BIOS. Now if you saw my last video about RetroArch, where I got the RetroArch BIOS folder, you can use the one that's in there. So if we go to that BIOS folder, go to System, and if we scroll down, this is the one you want. This is the PSX on PSP 660.bin. If you don't have this already, very easy to find online, but I can't give you a direct link. So this version is a copy of the PSX firmware that was used on the PSP. It's region free, so you only need this one. So just for convenience sake, I'm going to grab this and I'm going to copy it, and I'm just going to paste it somewhere a little bit easier to get. So in my BIOS folder, I'm just going to I'll paste it in there. I'm going to make a new folder. We'll call it PSX. I'm going to press and hold and then drag it in there. You don't have to do this. This is just to make it easier when we import our BIOS in a second. So we'll close out of that and then we'll load up Duckstation. Now Duckstation does come with an onboarding wizard, which you can see here, which makes things very, very easy to follow. So we're just going to go through the steps. So for GPU renderer, we want to set this to hardware Vulkan. If you notice any weird glitches in games, then I recommend setting OpenGL. Software you can use, it's technically the most accurate, but it's also the most performance intensive, and we lose a lot of the features like upscaling, which is what we want to do here. For internal resolution, we want to upscale it to match the resolution of the device. So in this case, it's a 1080p device, so we'll do 5 times. Now for aspect ratio, by default, the PS1 was in a 4:3, and it also was usually on a CRT, so you had like these kind of bowed edges. So you can leave this if you want, but you can also try 16:9 and take advantage of the full screen. Some of these do have built-in patches, so it will automatically apply any widescreen patches. I'm going to leave it on 4:3 as default, as personally I like having the squareness, but a higher resolution graphics. We're going to enable the widescreen rendering. This will enable those patches where it can help display it better for games that are supported. And we're also going to enable the PGXP geometry correction. So if you remember back in the PS1 days, I think Tomb Raider was a good example. If you were to get Lara to stand and turn, you tend to see some of the geometry, some of the rocks and things kind of twitching and being a bit wobbly because of the way it had to redraw the shapes for the 3D perspective. This does help correct some of that. So now we're going to import our BIOS. So like I said, you can just grab this straight from that RetroArch pack that we covered in the previous episode. I moved it to a more easily accessible place, so I'm just going to grab this one. So it's imported it, so we'll click OK, and this one is completely region free, so we only need to import the single one. We're also going to add our game directories. So currently my Crash Bandicoot game is not in the PSX folder, but I will be copying it in shortly. But just for now, I'm going to select my PSX subfolder. I'm also going to log into my retro achievements, which again, I've said it before, you can use this link here to create an account if you haven't already. It's something I advise you do. And then once you've done that, you can press login and you are logged in. Feel free to give me a follow if you so choose. And then we're just going to finish the setup. So obviously we don't have any games yet because we've not yet moved it over. I'm going to go to my downloads folder where I left those two. So I'm going to grab both of them and then I'm going to cut them. And then on this side, I'm going to find that PSX folder and then we'll drop them in there. There we are. So now if I go back to Duckstation, we can see Crash Bandicoot's there. I've got 0 out of 46 achievements, so I definitely need to give Crash Bandicoot a blast. So even though we've set up a lot of the graphics, we need to set up the controls. Now, for the most part, the controls will auto map, but as this uses a slightly different button layout, we're going to have to make some manual adjustments. So we're going to tap our burger menu. We're going to come down. We're going to go to controller settings. Now, we are going to go to touchscreen and we're going to disable the touchscreen because otherwise when we boot the game you'll see the touchscreen overlay, which we don't need. Then we're going to go to port 1, our controller type. We obviously want it to be the analog DualShock. You could do automatic mapping if you like, or you can bind your keys manually. So I'm going to do the automatic mapping, select our Odin controller or our Thor controller. So as it says here, the automatic mapping was complete, but we might have to manually adjust. So the D-pad will be fine, but it's these 4 face buttons that will be the issue. So you can see that triangle, which if you're familiar with the PS1 controller, is at the top, is the X button. So if we press that and then press our X button, you can see that it's actually button 99 on this controller. Circle is on the right, X is on the bottom, and square is on the left. Just finally for controls, for some reason on the touch screen, if we go down to enable game vibration, then this will forward the vibration so we'll actually feel the vibration in the game. So if you're playing Metal Gear Solid and you get to that Psycho Mantis fight, you'll get the full experience. Not sure why it's in the touchscreen menu, but that's a little quirk of Duckstation. So then we're going to come over to hotkeys. Unlike RetroArch where you enable select as your hotkey enable, for this one you have to actually do the full binds. So for fast forward toggle, I'm going to hold select, then press the right trigger. So it's the same as it is in RetroArch, but I need to do the full command rather than just the button. So that's the only one I tend to do. Obviously you can do rewinds and save states and things like that. You've got your quick load, quick save there. Like I said, when it comes to my achievements, I play on hardcore because I'm trying to be a proper gamer. So that rules that out. So we'll just dive into the game to make sure it boots. So we can see there, it's loaded my achievements. There we go, we've got that BIOS, so it's loaded straight into that gorgeous logo. I love this. This takes me straight back to having a PlayStation as a 4-year-old, I think I was when I got my first PlayStation. And then it should boot into the game. And there we go. So we'll just skip through some of the initial startup screen. Little hint for you, if you've enabled fast forward, you can just use the fast forward command to skip straight through most of the loading. So we'll start a quick game, we'll just see how it runs. So we can see that with the upscaling, it does look very clean on this gorgeous 1080p screen. And I think it looks quite good. Obviously you can expand to 16:9 if you want. We can have a look at what that looks like later. But it's all down to personal preference. So we can see the controls, I can jump, I can spin. I think square and circle is spin, and triangle gives me the little HUD. So it runs fluid, the textures are upscaled, it looks great. So we'll back out of this and we'll just have a look at some more settings. So we can press our back button. From the back button, we can access our achievements. We can exit the game from here. So we're going to go to our burger menu. We're going to go to app settings. So for interface, a lot of this is just notifications and things like that. System we've pretty much already covered, although I am going to fast forward memory card access because this makes saving your games using the built-in save dialog a lot faster. You can also enable fast forward boot, which can help you get into the game quicker as well. There are some options here with optimal frame pacing, which I like enabling. Obviously, some of this can affect games differently. It might work for some games but not others, in which case what you can do is you can actually change these settings from within the game. You can set a per game profile, and that will allow you to, when you boot into that particular game, if it doesn't have a profile, it will use the defaults. If it does, it will use those profile settings. So we've set up our graphics already. You can have a play around with texture filtering and things like that, but personally, I think the defaults are good enough. We can also change our aspect ratio, so we'll try match display, and we'll see how that looks like when we boot the game again shortly. There's also some enhancements here, so I like accurate blending. I like the forcing the 434 FMVs, so this is when a game used to have full motion cutscenes. When they're stretched, they look hideous, and they already looked pretty hideous. It was the mid-90s, so I like to keep them in 4.3. You can also enable texture replacements, so you have to enable texture cache and texture replacements. Personally, on a device with a screen of this size, the upscaling is more than sufficient. When I've tested texture replacements in the past, there was not a notable difference, so just use the upscaler. Audio, we don't need to really touch. Post-processing, this is where we can add some shaders. So we can add a CRT shader, for example. So we'll use this new Pixie one. No idea what it looks like, but we'll have a look shortly. We can also have a PlayStation border overlay, which is built into the app itself. So we'll check these out in a moment. Obviously, we've got our achievements. I'm going to enable my hardcore mode. As it says there, hardcore mode disables save states, cheats, and slowdown functions. So if that's something you want, you can do that. If not, it's entirely up to you. Finally, we're going to look at our memory card. So we're going to want to create a new memory card. I'm going to call this one PSX. We're going to create it. And then for memory card type, I'm going to want to set shared between all games. This will basically give you a shared folder. So going back to that Psycho Mantis boss battle, when he reads any Konami games, if you've got a shared folder, that should work. So I'm going to tap shared card name. I'm going to pick the PSX one I just created a second ago. So let's have another look what it looks like with the shader. We can just load the save state. Oh no, it'll disable hardcore mode. Go on then, just for this case. So I've got my shader, so you can see I've got some scan lines. Because it's stretched, you can also see here that I've got these really ugly, this texture popping. And I've also got this PlayStation looking TV, which does eat up quite a lot of the screen, but quite nice, quite gimmicky. Now what I can do is from here, I can press my back button, go to my settings, and I can change my settings from here. So for post-processing, I'm actually going to remove that border overlay, and if we back out, there we go. But we can still see that because we've forced it to 16:9, it looks terrible because we can see all these textures that are being dumped, because back in the day, companies had to actually optimize their games rather than have them take up hundreds of gigabytes of space. So we'll press back again, we'll go to settings, we'll go back to our graphics, and we'll just change our aspect ratio. We'll match the game native, and then we'll back out. So as you can see, we've got a 4:3, we've got the slightly bowed edges and scan lines of the shader. This seems like an okay CRT shader. I'm not a huge fan of shaders, to be honest. I've not really looked at too many of them. This looks kind of cool, but not something I'll probably stick with. So for cheats, I did cover this in a video a while ago, but just to keep things nice and tidy, if we press our back button and then scroll down and go to patch codes, Duckstation comes with a built-in cheat library, which is very, very handy. Not all emulators do. I believe this might actually be the only one that does, to be honest with you. You need to enable the codes first, but we can have infinite lives. I've enabled the cheat. You can see there that my lives are ticking up and up and up and up and up. So we'll get to 99. There we are. And then if I die, I'm still at 99. Just finally, I want to talk about saving space. So obviously, if you've got the Max model like me, you've got a terabyte of internal storage, so you can fit a lot of classic PlayStation games. They don't tend to take up too much because they were just CDs. So a max of about 700 meg per disc. However, we can really utilize the internal storage or your SD card space by converting them to what's called a CHD file, or a compressed hunks of data file. So what we're going to do is we're going to boot into CHDroid. We'll let it send us notifications, we'll allow everything. It's going to explain how it all works, but I'm just going to tell you how it works. So we're going to press this plus button, and we're going to find our Crash Bandicoot. So we're going to allow that folder, and then it's found the Q file. So even though the Q file itself isn't 600 meg, it's the bin file it is, they do come part and parcel. So we're going to check the settings. So you can do a recursive search if you've got files in subdirectories. For example, if you've got, say, a Final Fantasy game that came on multiple disks, and in that folder you've got disk 1 bin queue, disk 2 bin queue, then you can enable recursive search and it will scan through any subfolders. You can also use this as a patcher, so if you want to play any ROM hacks or language packs, then you can select your patch file by pressing this plus button. I'll probably be covering patches and ROM hacks in a future video, but it's not something I really use for the PS1. So once all that's done, we're just going to press convert files. So for conversion type for PS1, you want to make sure it's set to CD. We don't really need to worry about any advanced configurations. You can delete the original after conversion. I wouldn't recommend doing this just in case anything goes wrong during the conversion process. You can always delete them after you verify that the CHD definitely works, but that's entirely up to you. And then we're going to hit start. We'll hit consent. This can take a few minutes, shouldn't take too long. So there we go, so that's done. So I got a little notification and it vibrated when it was done. Probably took 30 seconds, if that. So on a per game basis, won't take long at all, but obviously if you've got a folder full of them, you might have to leave it running. I'm also curious, it's not something I've tested, is if we enable our high performance mode, does it run any quicker? So actually what I'll do is I'll delete the file and I'll give that a try. So it does actually seem to be moving a lot quicker. So I imagine if you've got lots and lots of games that you need to convert, then just enable high performance mode. That probably took about 15 seconds. So there we are. So if we go to our file explorer, so we can see here that the original bin and queue files were 603 megabytes. The zip file with them in was 521 megabytes, and the CHD file that we've just created is 443. So you imagine over tens and tens or hundreds of games, you're going to make some considerable space savings. And if we go back to Duckstation, we can see I've got my original bin queue version at 600 meg and our smaller version, our CHD. So we're going to boot that up. We can load the state, and we'll disable hardcore mode again. And there we go. It runs just as well, no difference whatsoever. It's perfect. And that was PlayStation 1 emulation using Duckstation on the AYN Thor. If you like this video, I would always appreciate a like. Make sure you subscribe because I will be doing tons and tons of AYN Thor setup guides for any consoles that it supports, so you'll want to stay tuned for them. And I'll also be looking at front ends later on. So, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.